I'm a grateful recovering NarAnon. My name is Rusty.
Interesting.
We're going to talk about boundaries, and kind of what we planned on doing was I would kind of open up, and then Denise would share some of her personal experiences with boundaries, and then I would share some of mine. I guess the two things that have been going through my head about boundaries since I've been thinking about this is that the saying, I'm not sure who said it. I want to say Abraham Lincoln, but I'm not sure he'd said this. Good fences make good neighbors. Mm-hmm. I don't know who actually said that, but
Robert Frost, I think.
Was it Robert Frost? It was a poet.
Yeah,
Okay.
it was just recently that it was on here. But go ahead.
Abraham Lincoln said most people are about as happy as they make up their minds to be. That's what I was thinking of. But good fences make good neighbors, and I didn't really understand that at first when I first heard that. The other thing is, what is a boundary? And as far as I've been able to figure out, there are two different kinds. There is, that's recording, let's leave that alone. There's a boundary that's between two things. And if they're looking this direction, it separates, I guess, me from you. And then there's a boundary between me and something else that protects me from the other. So the two kinds of boundaries are, one is a separation of identity and one is a separation of protection. And the other thing I wanted to say about boundaries that I have learned is that most of the boundaries I have, the people that I have the boundaries with don't even know they exist because they're not about the other person. They're about me thinking ahead of, okay, this has happened in the past over and over and over again. I was uncomfortable. What can I do next time to break that uncomfortableness cycle and plan to do something rather than plan to act rather than react to a situation. I had to look up a boundary, what the definition of it was. Separation between two things. Doors, fences, I think of a glass as being a boundary between the water and the air. So it can be a container. All these things have gone through my head as to what a definition of a boundary is. How I use them, I can get into that a little bit later. But Denise, I really just didn't have a whole lot more than that.
Well, good, because
You got a lot?
I've got some things that I thought maybe you would cover and I would just skip over, but I did it just for my personal benefit and learned quite a bit about myself doing it. So I love that. I always love that. I was going to kick off by saying what no boundaries looks like. The opposite of that, which this woman talked about that. I thought this was a perfect. I didn't realize I had choices really either. I thought it would be self-centered or selfish to not respond to each and everything that was going on in my life that was making me crazy, making me run around with my hair on fire. So I related to that today. No boundaries looks like, feels like, and I don't know if you've ever read in this book, in our SESH book, but all of this came from the SESH. And I did that on purpose because that's our book. And so there's so much in there when I just take a subject matter and go and look at it, which is how I do a lot of my research. But the camel and the nomad, it's called Limits, and it's on October 5th, page 279. I'm not going to take the time to read that because you have it, but that's one of the great readings, I think, that talks or shows us what boundaries look like, and no boundaries. Again, no boundaries looks like emotional bondage. It looks like me all bound up emotionally. Focusing on someone else's decision. One of the ladies in our group said there were two people in the room and nobody was thinking about me. And I so relate to that. That's just really stuck with me. When my sickness helps and lives for the addict while neglecting my own life. And I have done that for years. Me getting caught up in their drama. Getting and using drugs. And today it's even more than that because my qualifier, which is my spouse, is in recovery. So it's about practicing these principles in all my affairs, and it's amazing how it applies everywhere, and I just really didn't realize that. So getting caught up, in my daughter's drama, and boy, do they always have drama going on. Even this week, as I was preparing boundaries, there were so many things that I was able to take this stuff that I was actually reading and thinking about and apply it to Courtney trying to get her tags in Tennessee because her emissions on her vehicle keeps failing, and she had no clue that was a requirement up there. And it's caused her hours, and in our conversations, it's caused us hours of how to deal with this. Years past, I would have just gone up there and tried to fix it, and I'm so thankful that even though it's kind of been painful, I can just just sit in it, and it's okay. Acting out of desperation. Boy. Giving ultimatums and threats with no intention of carrying them out. And when I do that, that diminishes my self-esteem and it lessens my credibility with others. What that personally looked like in the beginning with, Rusty kind of said, Denise, if you'd kind of share what it looked like before and what it looks like after. So I wanted to talk about like an aspect of it and then share kind of what that looked like in the beginning with my addict coming to his bottom and me as well, what that kind of looked like for us together. And that looked like me confronting Greg by asking him, "Are you using?" And him saying no. And then just standing there, and then I felt stupid. And I knew I wasn't, but I couldn't. In my detective work, I couldn't figure it out. And so, more will be revealed. The second thing, and if y'all have any comments, come on in here. We're a small group. Boundaries can happen in our lives, and they result from learning what they are and learning what they're not. And they're not, like Rusty said, most of the boundaries that he has, other people don't even know necessarily. So they are not restrictions on other people. But it's kind of a fine line, especially when you first start trying to develop them, because they kind of sound like maybe they are restrictive for others, but it's really just that we're looking at it instead of from their perspective, from our perspective, through our, we're holding the kaleidoscope to look at it at our angle. So some of these kind of maybe sound like they are restrictive for the other person, but with just a tweak, they can be my boundary.
Seth covered that society, though, has taught us from the very beginning to walk in somebody else's shoes, see it through their eyes, to be compassionate.
Yes.
So it's a contradiction of what we're used to.
It would seem to be that way, but there's a difference between empathy and not taking care of yourself.
Yes, good point. And the point being, welcome you guys, the point being, and then we'll introduce ourselves again, not to the exclusion, compassionate, yes, for other people, but not to the exclusion of ourselves. And I think that's where I would just lay my, my life down on the railroad track and they would just run over.
Well, I was in my hyper-religious upbringing, my oppressive Southern Baptist upbringing, it was like, I was taught it's better to give than to receive. Well, that's not what the book says. It said it is more blessed to give than to receive. It is also blessed to receive. So what I heard was, I'm supposed to give and not get.
It also says you receive tenfold.
Right.
So it's
Yeah,
a lot of words in there.
I know, and everybody leaves them out.
Yeah,
It's like, okay, if I, people just walk up to anybody in general that as a friend, or not even a friend, just an associate, give them a compliment and it'll make them uncomfortable 9 times out of 10.
Yeah.
People don't know how to say just thank you,
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Seth, again, one other thing I want to say, and I'll shut up, is Sharon and I figured out that our addict is not the only addict.
Right.
He is our addiction.
Right.
Even in his recovery, he has remained our addiction.
Right.
And we figured that, light bulb came on yesterday with that deal. And so
Great life.
we're as guilty as
The awakening begins.
anybody else. Anyway.
Thanks, Seth. That's awesome. Denise?
Rose?
Rusty.
Sharon.
Seth.
Juliet.
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 Welcome. Glad you're here. We're talking about boundaries. Rusty kind of kicked off. We just talked about what boundaries aren't, and then we're in the middle of talking about they can happen and they result from learning what they are and learning what they're not and the restrictions on others. And that's kind of where we picked up. So recognition, the next one was recognition of the lack of boundaries. Kind of just what we're, and not really knowing the whole content. I mean, that's right. What we learned was right, but it was just a piece of what's right. Mm-hmm. There's a lot more to the puzzle. Yeah. Being able to focus on me. Accepting responsibility for myself. Not just for how I relate to others. Wisdom. That one's huge.
Wisdom is knowledge that is used. Mm-hmm. You can know something and not use it. And I've been guilty of that. It's like I know better than to do this, and I do it anyway, then I'm not using my wisdom. Once I use it, then it becomes wisdom. Absolutely. But you got to have the knowledge first. Right. And it's 99%, I think, of all recovery programs is awareness.
Mm-hmm. I'm Sharon.
Sharon?
When we first started, we had our first meeting February 27th, and it was NarAnon and NA, because nobody knew what we were doing. We were just kind of hanging on to each other and trying to figure it out. Then we separated after a couple weeks, and like I said, I'm the chair, and there was probably, maybe 12, 14, 16, I don't know. It was a lot of people.
Wow.
And at the end of the meeting, everybody was sharing phone numbers and emails, addresses, and everything like that. And I didn't give my phone number to anybody. Because I felt like I'm drowning. Mm-hmm. I can't take on everybody else's problems. And I spotted one person right away just through her actions at the meeting that I thought was going to be, I think there's maybe one in every group starting out, that it's just constant drama, and that's, their problems are very real, but I think they're also addicted to the drama. I didn't give my phone number to anybody probably till about 4 weeks ago. I just thought, how can I get better if I'm taking on everybody else's issues? And I felt really selfish about that. But I just didn't. Now I'm okay with it. I really am. But, and we are in such a small town. I mean, we have 2 red lights, so there's no such thing as anonymous. Everybody knows everybody's. So there were 2 people that already had my phone number because we were friends, but I didn't give phone numbers to anybody. Until a
Good for
couple
you.
weeks ago. So,
That was a boundary.
it was.
And it's part of taking care of ourselves.
I need a boundary. My wife doesn't like my little.
Like your
You
wife.
make sense.
He's a
Fidgety.
fidgeter.
Fidgeter. Need one of those.
I know, yeah.
Fidget spinner.
Boundaries result from seeing the effects in my children. Boundaries can happen in our lives and result from being sensing responsibility to lead by example. Boundaries can result from work in the NarAnon program. So here we are. What that looked like for me, money was a big deal at my house. I did not want to spend the money to buy a drug test. So instead, I paid a $120 counseling session fee to go and talk to my counselor, who told me, go buy a $35 drug test and request that he use it. And so that kicked it off. And I did that. And he refused. I was like, doggone it, we didn't talk about what we were supposed to do if that happened. But somehow I was patient, which that was not usually the case. Usually I would have just started in and been nonstop until, something happened. Who knows what. And but I was patient, and the next day he took it. Boundaries are, Rusty gave us a couple of definitions. Set like property lines, and I think that's kind of what he used. And everybody's property lines look different. My piece of property is, it's kind of got a little L place in it before it's rectangular. Some people's are square. Some people's are circular. Some people's are octagonal. And so can our own personal property lines be for ourselves, our boundaries that we set around us. Boundaries are healthy personal limits that I set for myself. And I'm going to speak in I set for myself and talk from experience, strength, and hope. Because that's how we are encouraged to speak with our groups. Not talk about we, but talk about I, and then how that relates to we. Because we as a group can relate, and you'll see that by everybody shaking their head. I don't know if that's apparent in your meeting, but in our meetings, it's just like, yeah,
All my head does.
Yes, which is so awesome. It's encouragement. But I'm going to speak from that because when I speak, especially to my addict, and I speak from my point of view, instead of saying we, it gives us that boundary. There it even separates, and we can speak from different points of view without, that was part of my problem, was I thought he thought like I thought. Well, no, he doesn't think like I think. So,
Give you an example. If they invented a pill to cure addiction, most people's thoughts in Nar-Anon are, oh great, my child, husband, whatever, doesn't have to go through this. Being an addict, my first thought is, what will 6 do? Red pill, blue pill, I'm taking both of them. What else you got in your pocket? We think different.
and I mean, I just
It's the best example I know.
had no clue, and that is so true.
Yes.
That is,
Yeah.
and I still, when things come out of his mouth like that, I still just, wow, I just really try to absorb that so I can remember that, that he thinks differently. They think differently. Boundaries are what I will allow in my life, what I will not allow in my life. I wasn't going to give my phone number out. 2 people already had it. That was enough. I needed some time. And you were already cheering. Boundaries are a change in my behavior. They are to take care of myself. And they do not come easy, at least in the beginning.
Even later, you can slip right back into it without realizing it,
Yes.
which is our addiction, from my experience. Ever since our lake retreat, I'll refer to lapses in our addiction as relapses, because these are habits. This is our addiction that we have to break and maintain through the 12 steps. But like you should never blame yourself for setting boundaries. That's what I love about boundaries, is you can't pour from a bucket that's empty.
Mm-hmm.
And as loved ones of addicts, our buckets are empty, because every little bit of moisture that we get in our bucket, we would give to them. And first you got to repair the holes in the bottom of the bucket, which you can do through the work of the 12 steps, and then you got to pour water in it, and then maybe eventually you can learn how to balance a half ladle instead of dumping the whole thing to someone else's resources. But that's what I love about boundaries.
I like the book
Well
analogy.
put, yeah, well
Very-
put,
very well put.
Juliet. Very well put. So my initial boundary that I made in my story is to request that Greg take that drug test, because I didn't really realize I had a choice or how to go about setting that boundary to be able to recognize that choice. Effects of boundaries. They provide consistency. They fill your bucket. They produce calmness in my mind, my spirit, my existence. Boundaries give me clarity of mind. It's kind of like with addicts, they have to stop putting drugs in, and when they stop, they actually get a little bit of clarity in their thinking. It stops the insanity. It stops my rescue party. It stops me dumping the whole amount of resource I have on them. It makes me happy. It reflects healthy self-love. It creates a better way to live. Boundaries help me identify my responsibilities more easily. They result in reclaiming my life, little bit by little bit, like you said. That is a wonderful example. Results in feeling as if the weight of the world has been lifted off my shoulders. And I sometimes feel that constantly. I think it kind of relates to what Juliet was saying about my relapses. I'll get something will happen, like when I asked him to take that drug test. I mean, literally, it was just like weight off of my shoulder. And then when he said no, it was like back on. And so it was just kind of like it's kind of like weightlifting. And I mean, that's what we're doing. We're weightlifting, trying to learn how to half ladle. Boundaries paves the way for serenity. It doesn't necessarily produce the serenity, because just like that, it went away and then it came back really quick, but it paves the way. And I think we start learning how to recognize serenity. Maybe there were bits and pieces, but it was so dramatic. My life was so dramatic that I couldn't even enjoy the little snippets of serenity that I had, because I was waiting, what's going to happen next? That other shoe to drop, kind of. Produces inner peace. Boundaries teach me gratitude for inner peace. And I am thankful today for just those little snippets. Gives me hope. Enables me to make decisions because I have some clarity. Gives me choices. Stops me from acting like I'm God. teaches me about detachment, which is basically just releasing my attempts to control. It enforces detachment. When I've set my boundary and I realize it, then it enforces that, what Rusty was talking about, that separation. And then I'm able to, everything's just not my counselor talked about my codependency as a big ball of spaghetti.
Cooked.
Wet, yeah, all sticky and all together. And that I was going to have to pull each strand apart and look at it and, decide what to do with it.
Enmeshment.
Yes. Boy, I had a good case of that. Helps me be the person I want to be. And I love this. This is from a different codependency book, but it's awesome. It creates flack. And that's either
Creates what?
flack.
Okay.
When I set a boundary and it's something different,
Oh,
the response from
There's a pushback.
the other,
Yeah.
yes, is a pushback. So just expect it's going to happen, and it can be spoken or unspoken criticism. It can just be the look, with the arms crossed, and there I stand feeling stupid again, because I'm not used to this boundary I've set, but I know it's healthy, but it's still new territory for me. So do I grovel or do I just accept that pavement of serenity that I'm having here? It's challenging. Helps me stay on my side of the street, and it enables me to act in love. And those were all, what I did was just looked in the back under the index and looked at boundaries, read each one, and then just wrote all these different things down that I saw.
I'm Rose.
Hey, Rose.
You're absolutely right. Whenever I set a boundary, it's going to create. Flack is the word you use, but it's going to. People that are not used to you having boundaries are not going to like it when you begin to set them, or when I begin to set them. They're going to want me to go back to the way I was. So if I'm, normally very docile and okay, whatever you want, and I question something, then it's like, oh, where did she find her voice at? Also a boundary is about creating a space of personal safety. I'm doing what I need to do to take care of me, to keep me safe, to meet my needs, to feel safe being who I am. So, and for a lot of us, or, let me go for me. For me, as a child, I had no personal space and no safety. So, yeah, my boundaries are a lot about creating safety, not giving my phone numbers out to people that I don't know, or to ones I don't quite feel comfortable with, or, anyway. So, it's about taking care of me.
Thanks for sharing, Rose.
Thank you.
The effect in my story was now we could talk on level ground. The guesswork of are you using was over when he took the drug test
and failed it.
and failed it.
Okay.
With
You didn't say
flying
that.
with flying colors.
Yes.
Now I didn't have, when he answered no, he's lying. And, I knew it, but it's kind of like Sheldon on Big Bang Theory. Raj and what's the blonde?
Penny?
Penny.
The girl?
Walk out, yes, Penny, walk out of the bedroom, and all of them are standing there in the morning, and she goes, oh, it's not what it looks like. So Sheldon starts trying to figure out,
What does it look like?
what did it look,
You didn't get it, yeah.
it looked like they slept together, but she said it wasn't. And Leonard said, she lied, Sheldon. And he was like, oh, well, don't I look stupid? You know, I related to that.
Yeah.
Don't I look stupid? So,
There's a meme I would like to share.
okay.
If it doesn't look right, doesn't feel right, it probably isn't right.
I like to use one about a duck. Walks like a duck, quacks like a duck. It's a duck.
Yes, very good. Okay, some examples of boundaries and what they look like. I can leave when someone's behavior affects me in a negative way. I can just walk off. I don't have to try to fix them. I don't have to tell them, you know, what you're saying is wrong. I can just leave. I thought I had to fix them. I can return on my own terms. I can go collect myself out there and decide, you know, I do want to participate in that party, or I do want to participate in that activity, and I just need to not, you know, just, they can say those things, and I don't have to agree or disagree. I can just be, and that's hard for me. If I want to participate, or I cannot. I choose not to participate in circular arguments. And this one's tough for me, because that's how my spouse and I, my addict and I, we were saying the same things, just different ways, and we just never could connect on it. But this was helpful for me. I stopped repeating myself or attempting to say the same thing in a different way when I realized my motive is not for clarification, but to persuade.
No, that's a big one.
I said that again.
Yeah.
I stopped repeating myself, because in that circular argument, I would just say the same thing, but I would say it in a different way to try to get my point across. But it wasn't because I was clarifying because he didn't understand, because he understood, but I was trying to persuade him to think like I was thinking. So not for clarification, but to persuade. I can allow someone to struggle until I'm asked for advice. That's hard for me, because I can walk in a room and tell you what's wrong. I can sit at our business meetings and hear everybody talk, and then I can fix that. So I have to try to
I
be
did that last night at the table.
careful. Had to gingerly do that.
We had two things, we had a conflict because the NA's got stuff going, and all it came down to was we realized that our 10:30 and their 10:15 was the same person. So that solved everything. We're like trying to shift and adjust and move around.
But it took all of us
Yeah.
Talking because
talking about it
yeah.
because nobody knew.
And we weren't hearing the same things, and nobody was revealing what really was going on. It was kind of a mystery. And you could kind of feel some power struggling going
Yeah.
on, and not wanting to give, and
Yeah.
and not wanting to be put on the spot. And I respected all that.
I knew all the Nar-Anons realized that. The NAers didn't have a clue.
There was a power struggle going on.
Yes,
Yeah.
there
Yeah,
was.
I could see that right off the bat. Whoa. That's when I started backing up.
Yeah, I did too.
We don't want to interfere
Yeah.
with your project.
And because we were invited here, and this, you know, and we did want to hear what they had to say.
Right.
Most
I
definitely.
would love to hear the codependency.
You and me both.
So,
By the recording.
I share experience, strength, and hope from my perspective. That's an example. I ask permission before I give advice. Do you mind if I share what I have found that works for me?
I've started doing that as well.
It makes a big impression. People go, yeah, Whereas if I just jumped right in it, they go,
As opposed to, you need to do such and such.
yes.
Or, well, when I did that.
Or are you open to some,
Input.
input? Or my experience in this? Are you
The
open
A
to
word, advice, turns most people off. You know.
Woulda, coulda,
So,
shoulda.
you know, input, suggestion, you know, something like
Experience, strength, and hope. It's amazing. It's just a different way of looking at it. You know, it's taking it and looking at it a little different. Set limits prior to the need. Rusty talked about that. That was a big thing. This is not working for me. This keeps happening in my life, you know, which makes me sit down, slow down, stop, and do step 11 a lot. Make decisions ahead of time for what's acceptable to me. Already know ahead of time how I want to behave. If I'm unsure of my responsibility, ask the question, is this my issue or the addict's issue? You know, or whatever, my daughter's issue, or, you know, in all our
that. There's
affairs.
stuff with, other than addicts,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
at work,
absolutely.
especially.
Absolutely.
In
You
all
know.
relationships.
Yes. And I really wanted to go down that road, and I thought you need to stay relevant to who and where we are today. And so I had to redo a whole bunch of stuff. Okay, so what that looked like, well, those were, you know, those are self-explanatory. Me and my spouse, we have a history of circular arguments. Today I realize there's a third aspect to the way of looking at things, and it is different than how I grew up. I had a family with a strong right and wrong justice scale and thought everything fell in those two categories. There are many roads in recovery, and there's right and there's wrong and there's different. And that was hard for me.
There's right for me at the moment and wrong for me at the moment. But it doesn't always stay that way. Sometimes that right for me in the moment changes and it becomes wrong, and that wrong can become right at different points in recovery. Because as I change, my understanding of the universe changes.
It's so funny that you say that. I'm Juliet.
Juliet.
I was just envisioning boundaries and working the 12 steps provide a compass. And it lets you know which way is due north. But sometimes due north can shift, just like, you know, with the earth and its rotation. And whenever you're not actively working the 12 steps, which can happen, you know, if a week goes by or an hour goes by, and you forget about this character progression that you're supposed to do, the compass will wobble. You won't have a steady needle pointing in one direction. And we're all guilty of it. We all have bad days where our compass wobbles. We don't know which way is up. But that's the beauty of the 12 steps, is you can work them and envision them and think about them in an instant. And I actually took this from NA, but one of my favorite phrases is, you can start the day over at any time. You know, if you've had a bad day and you've done everything wrong, you've made every wrong choice, but you have that moment where you realize that, you can just start the day over and say, okay, from here on, I have that level of awareness.
We have a meeting in our home group, it's the third Sunday of the month, called We're More Alike Than Different. And we actually read out of the NA basic text. It's the basic text study for the NA book, because it's been around longer and got a lot more stuff in it than we have. And one day we'll have our books.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. How to maintain, lastly, how to maintain my boundaries. And it's opposite the camel and the nomad. Step 11, prayer, reading NarAnon literature, going to meetings regularly. Not just going to meetings to be in meetings, but to be accountable with those people in that meeting. There's a lady in our group that talks about, I haven't talked to my addict in a long time, but I know when he calls, I'm going to need all of y'all and all of your support. And I think she feels accountable to us in that. And that helps her stay in her program
She'd been saying that for a while,
a
and he
long
did.
time. And it did.
And he did. And she was able to say what she needed to say and stand her boundary. It was kind of neat.
It was. And she shared that with
Yes.
us, and that made us all feel like,
Yeah.
wow, yay, you know?
When you share your positive progress, you strengthen it. It's like when you share your joys, you double them, and when you share your pain, you half it in the rooms.
That's hard. I'm Sharon.
Please, Sharon.
In our new group, you know, we all, you see it in all the literature, but it's very true. You know, I came to NarAnon to figure out a way to cure my addict. Just
Oh,
everybody, that's what everybody does.
Yeah, everybody does that.
But and the more I read and the more that I study, you know, and what I try to help, what I believe is that this is not anything really to do with the addict, because the addict is going to be an addict for as long as they're breathing.
Yep.
They may not be in active addiction, they may be in wonderful recovery, but the rest of us that have to live with it, we figure out how to live the rest of our lives. And so that's what I'm trying to get out of it. And it's really hard because I don't want to be the NarAnon Nazi to say, no, we don't need to talk about that, because what we're having is, and this is a boundary that I need to set, and I don't know how to do it without being,
Mean.
Not
yeah, we're having addict updates and whining. That's, you know, and I have a couple of people who will step up and say, well, you know, and we'll move on, but it's the same people that every week that are having trouble. I don't know how to circumvent that.
I'm Rose.
Heroes.
Especially in the beginning when I used to see that, when it came, you know, when I would share, I would try to make a point to keep it. I'm discovering that this program is about me. I have to focus on me and use the words I wanted, I needed, I thought, I felt. I did this, you know, I wish I had done that, you know. I try to keep, you know, in a good way to say, I'm the one that's got to make the changes. I'm the one that's got to focus on me. I don't know that it's, this needs some old timers here to say this. I don't know that it's good to call anyone out in a meeting.
No, I don't want to do that.
Yeah, because that's going to discourage. But if I can do it by example.
Well, even, and Seth mentioned yesterday, we were having this conversation at home, and he said, when he said, you know, we still have the addiction of being addicted to him, I feel like I'm just as guilty as other people in the group. We're just talking about a different thing. They're talking about their addict who was in active addiction and whatever, and we are like, he's doing great. When we're not talking about us and we're talking about somebody else, it's not the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
We have one of our readings. And
I got it right.
Have you got- okay.
Well, I don't know if
It's
this
the-
exactly.
Which one are you talking about?
The page 244, the quote
Changing ourselves.
our guide for the family of the addict and drug abuser. The important thing is to learn which interactions are destructive and which might be creative, and then have the courage to attempt a creative approach. The change must begin with the non-user. The drug-dependent person will not seek help in recovery as long as his immature needs are met and his problems are solved by his family and friends. That's one of the things I'll read. And then there's another one that says...
There's a reading that we read every meeting that specifically addresses us not trying to fix the addict.
Changing
Instead of
ourselves.
helping?
It may be changing
Change
ourselves.
ourselves. Yeah.
And we read that almost every meeting.
Where's that?
It's one of the form.
sheets that we read.
When we wrote Off the World, we got all this stuff to read at meetings, and that's what I got. And one of those we started using.
Is it in that blue book?
I don't know, maybe it is. Let me see.
And I do the healthy meetings, everything, but that book that I just,
Changing ourselves.
yeah.
It's in there, yes. Okay. While you're looking that up, Rusty, I'm going to finish.
Yes, it's a change.
Step 10, dealing with suffering and challenges in life daily. How to maintain my boundary. What that looks like in my life. Step 11, almost every day I seek through prayer and meditation to improve my conscious contact with God as I understand Him, praying only for the knowledge and will for me and the power to carry that out. Julia.
In our meetings, we've had the same issues with people wanting to focus on the addict. And exactly like Rose said, is you just try to speak from your own perspective. And I have realized internally that that is actually a need for me to set a boundary with myself. Because our addiction is to help, but it's actually to control. We're controlling under the guise of helping. And so I have to have a moment with myself when someone is focusing on the addict saying, I need to bring it back, focus on me, because I'm focusing on them right now and what they're doing wrong and what I think they should be doing.
Ooh.
And I can change that reaction to crosstalk, which would be your instinct, would be crosstalk, directly addressing the issue, telling them that that's not what we do here,
Right.
you know. But instead, I have to switch that back to me and realize that's a flare-up of my tendencies of perfectionism and control and anxiety caused by people not following the rules, pretty much.
It's only been in the last couple of weeks that I realized that you could actually, on August 19th, go look at October 26th.
Yes.
It would be okay.
Doesn't have to be
Progress.
You're also,
That was just not. Why would they have dates on them if it wasn't supposed? That's just my mentality.
I relate to that.
progress, not perfection.
Yes, that is progress.
once and it has to start somewhere, okay, with talking about myself. And we saw this in our group. I mean, it started out that way too. But real early on, I saw in here that in all the literature that this wasn't about the addict, and so it clicked. My parents me growing up being an addict, and then you just kind of broken record it, and I've actually heard people share in our meetings lately that they like to hear people share about themselves and not about their addicts. And they realize who in the room has been here longer than others. I actually heard someone share this at a meeting. You can tell who's been here a little while and who hadn't, or how long. And to watch people go from talking about their addict to not talking about their addict, at all. And sometimes they even said, you wonder if they have an addict because they never talk about them, you know? And once it starts with one person, it will snowball. Other people will like figure it out and they're like, oh wow, you got something I want. Come on in. And the readings, have a seat. The readings that talk about, you know, addiction. I wanted to kind of shift the subject, if anybody didn't mind, real quick. Okay, y'all were talking about being addicted to the addict. Okay, when an addict uses, the brain rewires itself. When an addict stopped uses, the brain rewires itself. When an enabler enables, the brain rewires itself. And when you stop enabling, addiction is behavior. It is a disease of the mind, yes, but it is also a behavior. You take a drug, you put it in your body, okay? Enabling is a behavior. The addict cannot get clean until they stop doing the drug. They cannot recover. Let me rephrase that. An enabler can't recover as long as they're still doing the behavior. The behavior has to stop first. Now, I've heard it said in our groups, and it's by some members who've been there for a while, if an addict relapses, they can die quicker than if a Nar-Anon relapses. Don't know if I actually agree with that so much, because some people enable themselves to death. And you can have a heart attack from the stress. I mean, probably that's why the number one cause of death in the United States is heart attacks for, you know, or maybe it's number 2 now over heroin overdose. But anyway, it can be just as detrimental to the entire dynamics of the family, the addict, the non-addict, when an enabler enables. Yes, there's not an immediate effect. The recovery process, and that's why we have this meeting called, you know, we're more alike than different. I think the differences are in identification, but the disease and the recovery process is almost identical. That's why people suggest, you know, that NarAnons go to NA meetings, especially where there's, you know, not a whole lot of NarAnon clean time, I guess, for lack of a better word. I wish NarAnon had chips
that'd be
and
awesome.
medallions, you know, and
Keys
I've
hat.
actually tried to figure out a way to make that happen, but I just hadn't
Hard to
yet.
qualify that though.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the kicker, you know, it's on an honesty scale.
Yeah, because I relapsed last week.
Yeah, I relapsed daily.
Well,
Yes.
it's, and the other thing is that an addict can relapse without using drugs.
Dry drunk.
You get clean physically in this order: mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. You get dirty spiritually, mentally, emotionally, physically. It's the same with us. You stop physically, there's a mental emotional healing, plugging up the holes in the bucket, that's where the steps come in. Then the spiritual connection in the last 3 steps, and the traditions. When you stop doing the things that you were doing here, you can go back to relapsing.
When we first started this process and my son got clean, he said something which is, I said, are you interested in the process? I said, do you have cravings? I mean, I just had this mental image of him, whatever, fiending, and that a word. Anyway, he said, no, it's harder to be the kind of person that doesn't use than it is to be the person that doesn't use. Does that make sense?
Yes.
But that applies to us too.
I think we as enablers, for lack of a better word, are rather fortunate. We do have the same disease as an addict, but we're fortunate in that we don't have to go through that physical process. And we're also unfortunate in that we have to dial right into the emotional and mental process, because that's where the rubber meets the road in this, for addicts and us. You know, you take away the drugs and the alcohol from an addict, what do you got? A messed up alcoholic drug addict. There's still, that's the dry drunk syndrome.
Mentally and emotionally.
And mentally, emotionally, they've not progressed past getting the substance out of their body. So that's where the real work comes in for all of us. And that's the hardest part. That's why I have to have a higher power. Because I cannot do this by myself. And one of my daily prayers is, please help me to see with clarity my own behaviors, my own needs, and where I need to change. Because sometimes I can't see it.
We've run out of time. There's a 10:30.
It's actually 10:15.
10:15.
We need to roll.
Okay, it's a 10:15 over there. So we're going to close this workshop.